Washington, D.C., August 20th, 2025. The struggle over Ukraine's future security guarantees reached a new flashpoint as Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov declared that any dialogue excluding Moscow will lead nowhere. His statement coincided with a NATO Chiefs of Staff meeting, underscoring how the debate over Ukraine's safety has become the focal point of global diplomacy. Speaking in Moscow alongside Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi, Lavrov was blunt. He insisted the West, and especially the United States, knows that excluding Russia from such talks is both unrealistic and dangerous. His remarks came just days after US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Alaska for a closely watched summit. I think the West, and especially the United States, understands perfectly well that seriously discussing security issues without Russia is completely unrealistic and a road to nowhere, Lavrov stated. The Alaska summit between Trump and Putin, captured in images of a firm handshake, set the tone for this week's diplomacy. Trump later announced he was ready to provide air support as part of a US security guarantee for Ukraine, but firmly ruled out deploying ground troops, a responsibility he said should fall on European allies. On Monday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Washington, joined by European leaders including France's Emmanuel Macron, Britain's Keir Starmer, Italy's Giorgia Meloni, and Germany's Friedrich Merz. Together, they urged Trump to maintain strong support for Kiev, emphasizing that Ukraine's security guarantees are central to ongoing negotiations aimed at ending the war. European leaders pushed proposals ranging from NATO-style collective defense commitments to the deployment of international military contingents inside Ukraine. They also raised the possibility of increased training programs, but Russia has categorically rejected these options, framing them as direct threats to its security. For Moscow, any plan resembling NATO's umbrella of protection is seen as a red line. Lavrov went further, accusing Europe of deliberately escalating tensions by accompanying Zelensky to Washington. He claimed their presence was an attempt to clumsily influence President Trump to continue arming Ukraine, thereby worsening what he called an aggressive and dangerous situation. Yet inside the White House, officials from Kiev and its allies hailed progress. They said discussions on security guarantees had moved forward and noted that Vladimir Putin had agreed in principle, to hold a summit with President Zelensky in the coming weeks. If realized, it could mark the first direct encounter between the two leaders since the early days of the conflict. Behind the photo opportunities, however, lies a deeper dilemma. What kind of guarantees can realistically deter Russia without sparking wider war? NATO chiefs, meeting by video, debated whether Ukraine should be offered binding commitments or a lighter framework resembling partnerships with non-member states. The tension between deterrence and provocation remains unresolved. For Ukraine, the stakes could not be higher. Zelensky insists that only robust guarantees, backed by American air power and European commitments, will prevent future Russian incursions. His allies argue that anything short of binding security pledges leaves Ukraine vulnerable. But Russia's outright rejection of Western proposals complicates every option on the table. The debate is not just about Ukraine. It's about reshaping Europe's security architecture. For Washington, Kiev has become a testing ground for balancing deterrence with restraint. For Moscow, the issue is existential, preventing NATO from extending deeper into its perceived sphere of influence. And for Europe, it is about survival, unity, and credibility in the face of war on its doorstep. As negotiations continue, the world waits to see whether diplomacy can bridge these divides or whether the absence of consensus will harden battle lines. Lavrov's message was clear: talks without Russia will fail. The question now is whether the US, Europe and Ukraine can find common ground with Moscow, or whether Ukraine's security future remains a road to nowhere.